Dear listeners, thank you for supporting us with your subscription. Enjoy watching. My story typical and completely fits into the scheme of life. I met Olga in my third year at the institute. We studied in parallel groups. My love for her broke out instantly. It was like a disease. I couldn't find myself if I didn't see her for a while. She was everything to me. For a long time, I was afraid to tell her I loved her, thinking I wasn't good enough for her. I was not a freak, on the contrary. My girlfriend and fellow students found me sweet and charming. More than once they hinted to me that they wouldn't mind having a relationship with me. But I dreamt only about Olia. One day, we were with her in the same company on New Year's Eve, drank a little bit, and I dared to ask her to dance. After the dance, I did not leave her all night and even walked her home. She took me kindly and I soon confessed my love for her. We began to meet and spend our free time together. I gave her my whole soul. She breathed equally. Not too close to me, but not too repulsive. What happens between a man and a woman happened to us? At the end of January, my parents went to visit relatives in another city. We got together at my house to celebrate the end of the winter session. When everyone left, Alia stayed at my place. We finished our wine, and she began to undress herself. Needless to say, after what had happened, I fell in love with her even more. After about a month and a half, Olga told me that she urgently needed to talk to me. I was surprised at the seriousness of her tone. Olga hesitated for a long time and then said that she was pregnant. The term of 6 weeks. She said this and cried. I pulled her to me and kissed her tear-wet eyes for a long time. I was over the moon with the happiness that came over me. I was going to have a baby. It didn't matter if it was a son or a daughter. It would be a small part of her and me. If Olga gave birth, she would be with me and our child forever. I immediately proposed to Olga. She looked up at me. I could read relief and even some surprise in them. Apparently, she was afraid of something and expected some other reaction from me. But all this came to me afterwards. And then I really was happy. That same evening I announced to my parents that I was going to marry Olga and that we were going to have a child. My father grumbled a little about the manners of modern youth, but in general, he approved of my idea. My mother knew about my relations with Olga and she didn't object. A week later, my parents and I went to matchmaking. August's parents didn't mind since everything had gone so far. A month later, we got married. All of our classmates were at the wedding. Our family life began. Our son was born on time and we named him Dima. We graduated from the institute and got a job. Alia was on maternity leave for half a year only, and then she went to work, having entrusted the child's care to her grandmothers. 5 years later, my grandmother died, leaving me a 3-room apartment in an old house in the center of the town. I was thinking about having another child, but Olga was resolutely against it, grounding it on the need to live for herself and that we had had enough of one child. Moreover, it was said with such force and anger that I was even taken aback. Olga quickly hastened to hush up the conversation, adapting it to other directions. Life was going on. 10 years passed and disaster struck. Dima became seriously ill. A bone marrow transplant was needed to bring him to his feet. The closest man by blood, i.e. I, could become a donor. The operation was hard, but I had no hesitation. I was ready to give my life so my little boy would live. Only my wife was acting strangely. It was as if she didn't want me to be a donor. The day before my surgery, I gave blood and biomaterials for a DNA test. The doctors insisted they were afraid to risk the baby's life and wanted to check everything thoroughly. In the evening, Olga went out somewhere and came back late with teary red eyes. I thought that she was worried about the health of Dima, and I tried to comfort her, saying that everything will be fine. In the morning, we were at the clinic. We went into the cabinet and the doctor said everything was okay. They were preparing Dima for an operation and invited me to come with them. When Olga heard the doctor's words, she felt bad and fainted. The operation was a success. Dima was discharged in a month, and life went on as usual. But more and more often I began to think about all this behavior. The surprise in her eyes when she told me about her pregnancy, the fainting in the doctor's office. I reassured myself that it was my fantasy. Another 5 years passed. Olga and I were in our 40s. The heyday for a man and a woman, and all got really blossomed. A young, beautiful, confident blonde. The unattainable dream of many men. She dressed tastefully and carefully looked after herself. More than once I caught men's envious glances at my wife. Olga also saw them and seemed to be bathed in the atmosphere of men's adoration. But it did not bother me much because my wife gave me reasons to be jealous. We were already established in life. I was the first deputy director of the largest enterprise in our region and one of the main holders of its shares. Olga worked as a manager in a large advertising agency. She spent almost all of her salary on herself, explaining it by the fact that she had to meet the requirements imposed on the employees, and in general she was a woman. To maintain an appropriate image of her money was not always enough, and I had to pay out of my income. But I had enough to live on and provide for my family. The main thing is that Olga is with me and loves me. We were already living in a country house when Olga hired a housekeeper. According to her words, she had no time for cleaning and cooking. She often stayed late at work and went on business trips, shifting the care of the family to me. I should have thought about my wife's behavior. I was just ashamed to think bad things about her. Our married life was not easy. Loving my wife and not being a bad man, I constantly wanted intimacy with her. But Olga reduced sex between us to a minimum on the grounds that she was very tired of work. It got to the point that I sometimes months without intimacy with his wife. But this did not seem to bother her too much. She was blooming. A short stylish haircut, dark stockings, not tights, but stockings with a belt, high-heeled shoes. This was completed by the car I had bought her. We even had sex about it. The summer was coming to an end. It was August. I was having problems at work. We were short on raw materials and were disrupting deliveries to our partners. I spent days at work coming home only to sleep over. And that's when Olga decided to go to the seaside resort. Ira, I'm tired as hell. My nerves are shot, she told me in the morning over a cup of coffee. Oh yeah, I can't go now. You can see it yourself. We have a force merger. Then I'll go alone. The weather is still nice. The sea is in high season. Take Dimka with you. He'll be glad to bask in the sun. Dimka. He's just a kid with his mother. Let me go alone and you can join me later. I don't know if we'll solve the situation with raw materials. I tied my tie. Well, go on. We'll see there. After seeing Algoroth, I immersed myself in my work. Every day, she called me several times telling me about her impressions and complaining of boredom. She asked me when I would be able to come back. 2 weeks of her vacation flew by. In the evening, she called and said she had extended the trip for another 2 weeks. But what about the boredom? All right. Have a rest. She no longer asked me when I would arrive as if she was afraid of it. Our conversations on the phone were getting shorter and shorter. And at some point, she stopped calling at all. After some time, I tried to call Olga but her phone was off. Later, she called back herself, crackling for a long time telling me some nonsense. I got an impression that she was not alone there and carefully choose her words. There was the usual Yurachka and darling. She didn't even ask me how Dimka was. Without giving me half a word, she said goodbye and hung up. I dialed her number, but her phone was off again. Yeah. It didn't look like there was anything going on. I called the general manager and begged him for a week off. He grumbled for a long time, but he must have sensed something in my voice and let me go. In the morning, I was already on the plane. From the airport, I took a cab to the sanatorium where my wife was recuperating. I bought a week's stay at a nearby health center and checked into a single room. In the evening, I decided to take a walk along the promenade and look around. It was already getting dark when I heard a familiar laugh. 10 feet away, Olga was embracing a young man and laughing with her head tilted back in a gleeful, passionate laugh. My heart stopped and rumbled in my throat again. It stabbed my temples so hard that I even had to sit down on the parapet. Olga, my Olga, was hugging some woodpecker who was imposingly mistress-like, held her by the waist with one hand and stroked her buttocks with the other. My first urge was to run up and punch this macho guy in the face. But I realized that nothing good would come of it. My hand reached for my phone and I dialed the familiar number. Olga pulled away and took out the phone. "Horny husband, it's ringing." The man looked at her silently. It was quiet, and I heard every word she said. "Hello. How are you?" I weaved my lips dry with excitement, trying not to speak loudly, so as not to give myself away. "I'm fine. I'm resting. I'm sorry. My name is..." She disconnected and carelessly tossed the phone in her purse. "Sorry. Love. I'll call tomorrow and tell him all about us." She kissed her companion on the lips and took him under her arm. They hugged each other and slowly walked along the embankment toward the sanatorium building. I was in shock. We had lived together for 20 years, heart to heart as it seemed to me. I spared nothing for her. I loved her after all. All of a sudden, horny husband. I don't remember how I got to my room, how I got up to my room. I opened a bottle of cognac and drank from the bottle. Gradually, the pain subsided. I sat and stared blankly at the wall until the alcohol did its work. In the morning I got up with a sore head. My heart was pounding and the room was floating before my eyes. I did not want to live. I tried to pull myself together. What should I do? Just go home, wait for my wife and give her a kick in the ass. I got dressed, took my phone, and went out to the waterfront. I sat down on a bench and waited. There they were. The sweet couple held hands and slowly paraded toward me. Before I reached 10 meters they began to kiss. Actually, all the kissed mostly. Her beau only let himself be kissed. It was clear that he was doing her a favor, but this happy fall did not notice anything. I took a few pictures and dialed her number. Olga took out her phone with one hand and continued hugging her lover with the other. "Hello. It's good that you called me back," she began. "Olga. Don't waste words, turn around." I waved my hand at her. Olga turned her head and from surprise almost dropped the phone. I had no strength to argue. I turned around and went in the opposite direction. Number 1 caught up with me. I bought the most expensive bottle of cognac in the local store and found the head of security at the sanatorium where Olga lived. I have long told my story and he took pity on me through me a few videos from surveillance cameras, which finally confirmed that I no longer have a wife. That same evening, I flew home. I never saw Olga again. Apparently, she was holed up in the room of her lover. I did not find out who he was. What difference does it make who he is? The main thing is that I know who she is. Olga never returned home. A week later, her father came to collect her things. Hiding his eyes, he told me that Olga had left with her new husband. That's what he said. She was perfectly happy and passed me a note. "Yura, thank you for everything. I fell in love with someone else. With him, I felt like a woman again. It happens. I'm sorry." There wasn't a word about Misha. I got a bottle of cognac and poured it for myself and my father-in-law. We drank and my father-in-law told me an old story. It turned out that Olga had been dating a guy since her freshman year. They even lived together for a while. Then I came along. When Olga got pregnant, she thought it was that guy's. But when she told him everything, he ran away. That's when she decided to make me happy. So she slept with both of us for almost 6 months. When she married me, Olga thought that the child was not mine, and she was afraid that I wouldn't find out anything. When Dima got sick, she knew that a DNA test would uncover this deception. But when the test confirmed my paternity, she fainted from nervous tension, and I thought from love for me and my son. The father-in-law left, and I sat there for a long time and remembered our life and could not understand why she did this to me. To betray me so cynically, so brazenly, to throw away 20 years of our life so easily without hesitating, to give up my son without even to him. And then I realized that she had always been like that. I just did not want to notice anything. Corporations, business trips, delays at work. She had always loved only herself and lived only for herself. I no longer wanted to get involved in all this dirt. Everything was clear as it was. A day later Dima arrived. He held the note in front of his eyes for a long time and then put it on the coffee table. "Daddy, don't tear it up. Let it lie there so that you and I can never forgive it." He looked at me. There were tears in his eyes. 6 months passed. One evening, the phone rang. Euro. I recognized her voice and my heart ached. I realized that I was a wimp cuckold, but that I still love her. I wanted her so badly that my legs even buckled. "Hello, Olga." I tried to speak smoothly. "Euro, I need to talk to you. I don't want to go to your house." She was breathing heavily into the tube. "I'm staying at the hotel. Can you come over now? Did you come alone or?" "Alone." Olga interrupted me. "Come, I'm waiting." I knocked and entered the room. I smelled the fragrance of her favorite perfume. "Come in. I'll be right here." I heard her voice coming from the bathroom. In the room, there was a table laid out. Fruit, champagne, cognac. A plate of sandwiches. What was that all about? The return of the prodigal wife? "Have a seat." Olga didn't come in. She stormed into the room smiling at me charmingly. I hadn't seen her smile like that in 10 years. "Paul me a cognac." We drank. "Euro, I've made a terrible mistake in my life. I'm a slut. A whore, but I love you." She started with her eyes down. "I know it's unforgivable, but please forgive me anyway." I listened silently. The more she talked, the less I wanted her. It was like some kind of veil was slowly slipping from my eyes. And at some point, I realized I didn't care about her. Nothing had changed. She was the same as she was. I wanted to get up and leave, but still I decided to watch the end of the show. "I still love you. I can't do it without you, without Dimka. I'm sorry." This sorry, she repeated at regular intervals like a spell. I poured myself some cognac. "Where is your—" I tried to find the right word. God, it's such a bastard. I was like under hypnosis. "Look." He even hit me. She threw off her robe and I saw a perfectly groomed woman's body. Though I did not see any bruises, August sat down on my lap, wrapped her lips around me, and with one hand began to unbutton my shirt. I stood by the open window with my clothes on, smoking. I felt nothing but contempt for her. Olga, covered by a sheet, was sitting on the bed. "Well, what would you like to be, a husband again or a lover?" she said smugly, apparently believing that after what had happened between us, everything was back to normal. I carefully extinguished my cigarette, walked to the door and turned around. The astronaut. The door closed silently behind me. I pulled up to the intersection. Traffic light. The light was yellow.